Good morning, and welcome to today's Intelligence Explainer. You are tuning in to the Stylo News Intel Update Europe Situation Report for July 21st, 2026. I am your host, and our objective today is to provide you with a measured, factual, and strictly objective look at the geopolitical and security developments across the European theater over the past 2 weeks. Before we jump in, a quick word from our sponsor, ProWave AI. They're the brilliant developers behind Stylo Intel Ops, the advanced AI-powered open-source intelligence program utilized by defense professionals worldwide. They are also the team behind Stylo News, the commercial version you can access right on the web and through mobile apps, putting enterprise-grade intelligence directly in your hands. Here is our itinerary for today's Geographic Situation Report. We'll be moving methodically through the Baltic region, Northern Europe, the ongoing situation in Ukraine, and the Southern Europe flank. Finally, we'll wrap up by synthesizing all of this into a forecast of key watch items. Throughout this briefing, we will maintain strict neutrality, giving you just the facts, the perspectives of key decision-makers, and the underlying patterns without any unwarranted fear. Let's begin by examining our first theater of operations, the Baltic region and Poland. In the Baltic theater, we are keeping a very close watch on critical cross-border logistics nodes. We're talking about locations like Klaipėda Port in Lithuania, the Suwalki Corridor, and vital transport hubs like Rydzio-Jastrzębie Airport in Poland. Positioned directly in the middle of all this is the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad, which demands our continuous observation for any shifts in military posture or infrastructure vulnerabilities. Now, based on aggregated intelligence from the past 2 weeks, we assess that a deliberate near-term, large-scale conventional attack by Russia on Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, or Poland is, well, it's highly unlikely. We have medium confidence in that assessment. However, there is an elevated probability of hybrid operations. Analysts are consistently tracking calibrated, deniable pressures, things like sabotage, drone border incursions, and engineered incidents targeting energy and transport networks along NATO's eastern flank. This assessment aligns perfectly with what we're hearing from regional leaders. Open-source analysts have highlighted Polish Foreign Minister Sikorski stating exactly this, and Lithuanian intelligence echoes those very same warnings. The primary threat vector right now remains intimidation, essentially alliance testing that falls just below the threshold of open war. We're consistently seeing warnings surface about targeted, deniable provocations aimed at critical Baltic rail, port, and power distribution nodes. We'll now shift our briefing northward to examine Scandinavia and the High North. Up in Northern Europe, NATO's reinforcement corridors run right through Norway, Sweden, and Finland. Geographically, these sit directly adjacent to major Russian strategic assets, most notably the Northern Fleet complex on the Kola Peninsula. But despite that deep strategic tension, intelligence indicates the immediate challenges up here are largely non-kinetic. Here is where it gets particularly interesting. Recent reports citing Dutch intelligence detail a Russian state campaign that has successfully compromised everyday civilian IP cameras and intercom systems. These devices just happen to be situated right along NATO logistics routes. It is a highly practical, scalable, and entirely deniable method of cyber-enabled intelligence gathering. It effectively allows for real-time monitoring of troop and weapons movements across Scandinavian ports, railheads, and road networks. Consequently, the threat vectors in the Nordic and Arctic regions are highly specialized. We are tracking persistent cyber espionage, aggressive GPS jamming that affects aviation, and maritime surveillance conducted by commercial or shadow fleet vessels. The localized impact is significant. Frontline Nordic states, like Finland, are rapidly scaling up their drone warfare training and production just to counter these enduring gray zone pressures. The real danger here isn't an immediate Arctic invasion. It's miscalculation and infrastructure disruption. We now move our briefing to the active conflict zone in Ukraine, assessing both the military and diplomatic dimensions. On the ground in Ukraine, the kinetic reality remains severe. Intelligence from mid-July shows continuous, massed strike activity stretching all the way from Kyiv, down through Odessa, and into the Sea of Azov maritime zone. This physical reality of an entrenched, ongoing conflict really underscores the broader, unyielding diplomatic stalemate between the two belligerents. At the core of this diplomatic impasse are two mutually exclusive end states. Ukraine's objective remains securing long-term Western security guarantees and full NATO integration. On the flip side, Russia demands the permanent abandonment of Ukraine's NATO path, a presence Moscow considers to be an existential threat. So analysts conclude with medium-high confidence that the fundamental political conditions for a negotiated peace settlement remain entirely absent right now. Any near-term diplomatic engagements are assessed merely as coercive bargaining rather than actual steps toward a durable peace. Next, let's pivot southward to examine the Mediterranean theater and the pressures facing NATO's southern flank. The Mediterranean maritime corridor acts as the vital connective tissue between North Africa, the Middle East, and southern Europe. Critical NATO naval and air infrastructure, places like Sigonella in Italy, Ceuta Bay in Greece, and key bases in Spain, are deeply exposed to regional spillover here. Furthermore, these nations' economies rely heavily on unimpeded maritime trade. Disruption in these shipping lanes translates directly to higher energy and consumer goods prices across the globe. The threat envelope down south is complex and structurally linked to broader Middle Eastern instability. The most acute near-term risk stems from U.S.-Iran military escalation. In fact, recent official Iranian rhetoric has explicitly referenced NATO bases in southern Europe as potential targets if they're utilized in a wider conflict. Add to that the threat of disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz, and you have a recipe for severe energy market shocks. We are also monitoring latent yet structurally rising risks, like migration surges from North Africa and lone actor terrorism facilitated by trafficking networks. Let's now transition to the synthesis portion of our report, where we align official intelligence assessments with broader open-source sentiment to determine probable outcomes. When we cross-reference official NATO and state intelligence warnings with the broad consensus of open-source analysts, we see a very stark convergence. Whether you're looking at the Baltics, Scandinavia, or the Mediterranean, official and public assessments broadly agree. The immediate, high-probability threat isn't a direct conventional war. Instead, it's an intensifying campaign of hybrid, gray zone conflict, designed to test alliances and exploit civilian infrastructure. Based on today's intelligence synthesis, we have identified the most likely impending events. Here are the specific watch items you should be monitoring in the coming days. We strongly advise our listeners to watch for these patterns of disruption. First, expect reports of low-level probing, GPS interference, or minor sabotage events surrounding Baltic rail and port facilities. Second, look out for localized cyber disruptions or exposed surveillance efforts, like those compromised camera networks we discussed, up in the Nordic nations. And finally, anticipate continued volatility in Mediterranean shipping insurance and routing, driven by escalating rhetoric and naval posturing in the Middle East. And that concludes our Europe Situation Report. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. In an era where global adversaries utilize civilian infrastructure and deniable digital tactics to project power, the speed and accuracy of your information is quite literally your primary defense. How long can any organization survive today without real-time AI-synthesized intelligence? Thank you for joining us for this explainer. To stay ahead of these global flashpoints, we strongly encourage you to listen to the Stylo News Intel Update podcast on your favorite channel, or just follow the link on this post. Empower yourself with AI-powered news on demand and subscribe today at stylonews.com. Have a great day.